So the name of the talk is The Significance of Daily Meditation Practice, Formal Meditation Practice. And one challenge that I think any meditation teacher has is how to say what needs to be said in a way that is interesting and not too kind of like scolding, like not coming from a you should and you shouldn't, you must and you mustn't, like how to present, because essentially what I'm going to say in this talk is that we do need to meditate daily. But then the how does one say that in a way which is inspiring, hopefully, and not oppressive. And so I'll do my best. So I guess I should talk a little of my experience as a meditator. So I've been a bhikkhu for 25 years, and I did do, I think, about 10 meditation retreats in the 2 years before I became a bhikkhu. So 27 years of meditation practice. And now as an abbot of a meditation hermitage, I try to lead by example as well. Try to do at least 4 or 5 sessions of meditation a day. It's part of my daily regular routine. And I will also take periods of retreat where I will do a couple of times a year where I will do more than that. So I'm speaking to you as somebody who is committed to his daily meditation practice. And the way it seems to me, something I've learned about this quality of mindfulness is that if we are regular in our practice and really consistent, this quality of mindfulness becomes a really profound thing, something that literally begins to destroy ignorance as to the true nature of things. And the reason we suffer, Lord Buddha explains, is because of these 3 root kilesas: greed, hatred, and delusion. But those 3 things, or the craving for, the craving not for, the reactivity, the ill at ease that we experience, being contentious with life and with conditions. But the root of this is ignorance. Ignorance is not knowing. And because we don't know things according to how they actually are, then we misperceive them. That's the delusion. And mindfulness and clear comprehension is the direct antidote to that. And so when mindfulness, I guess we all have some mindfulness, and our habitual mindfulness tends to be a little bit fuzzy, a little bit clouded, a little bit scattered, not consistent. But when mindfulness becomes stronger and becomes more consistent, well then the meditation practitioner will begin to have glimpses of deeper reality, deeper truth, and will begin to see the way that misapprehending things, the way that delusions cause us to suffer. Now, it's an unfortunate thing, and I wish it wasn't the case. I really wish it wasn't this way. But according to my experience, it is this way. Mindfulness grows in strength and clarity and power through consistency. And unfortunately, it degenerates much, much faster than it is cultivated. So if we are quite diligent in our meditation practice for a period of time, and then we neglect it, something happens in life, some kind of significant drama or some work stress, a period of time where we have to be much busier. And many people find then you let the meditation practice go for a week or a couple of weeks, and you come back to it and it kind of feels like starting again. And one can feel after a period of years like it's one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back, and that can be a bit frustrating. And it is also my experience that if we really determined not to let things slip. So, and this is a thing where it can be a bit like having to force ourselves. That's not when we don't want to do it, having to force ourselves, that's not a pleasant experience. And suppose, but then it's important then to understand why. Why would we? So suppose we've been traveling and we come back and we really are tired. So, no, just go to sleep. You can meditate tomorrow morning. Actually, in the long term, it's much, much better if you do meditate before going to sleep. And or sometimes you might get up and you're meditating and the mind's just too sleepy. Oh, it's not working today. The mind, there is just too much sleep. I need to sleep a bit more. Go back and have more sleep. And this is actually a mistake, at least for those who want to have powerful mindfulness as a foundation for developing insight that will liberate the mind. This is that strategy won't work. And we have the examples of Luang Por Chah, who he gives very clear teachings. He says the correct approach to practice is when you want to do it, you do it. When you don't want to do it, you do it. When you're feeling inspired and energetic, you do it. And when you're feeling lazy and you don't want to do it, you do it. And there's a reason for this. This is how we develop insight into mind states. If you have a practice where you are just going to sit with whatever is, and that's a large part of how Ajahn Sumedho presents the teachings. It's like this. Now, if we don't sit with it as it is, we're not going to develop insight into the way that it is, and the way that we grasp at things, the way that we react to things, the way that the mind, the degree to which the mind is affected by liking and not liking, and the amount that we make ourselves suffer because of that. And if we develop a habit of being just willing to be with it, so that means you're tired and you sit, there's pain in the body and you sit, and aversion to the meditation and you still do it. Now, I don't recommend just sitting there with aversion. What I would recommend in such a circumstance, such a situation, is that one develops some real ability of cultivating loving kindness, because when we come to our meditation and we don't want to do it, if you have a look at the feeling in the heart space, what that feels like, I don't want to do this, there's some painful feelings there. There's irritation, there's aversion. And so you can see that among beings who have some suffering, you are one of them. And then it's appropriate to radiate loving kindness to beings who have suffering. And so there's a kind of a approach that we can take, which is called replacement by opposites. When we see that there's an unwholesome mind state, we actually get serious about giving rise to a wholesome one. So you have the list of the 4 great efforts, and I think in the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, the effort and energy comes up repeatedly. It is a path that requires that we put forth effort. So there's a few tools that we can have that will support us in that. And the metta practice is a large part of my practice, because I find normally, actually, when I come to the sitting cushion, there'll be some kind of suffering, whether it's coarse or subtle. Oftentimes it's subtle, but there'll be some kind of suffering in the mind. All of the hindrances have some painful feeling associated with them. And it's part of the conditioned world experience of different people have different opinions, and we'll hear news, some of it's pleasing, some of it's displeasing. Just the world is an impinging place, and much of impingement hurts. And so you come to sit, you want to be aware of the breath, and there's things in the mind. And some of those things hurt, oftentimes. And so when one aims loving kindness in that heart space, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be happy, one literally washes away whatever other mind state is there with this wholesome one, and can replace a feeling of irritation or resistance or aversion with a very pleasant mind state. And Lord Buddha explains in the 11 Benefits of Loving Kindness Sutta that for those who do cultivate loving kindness diligently, the mind concentrates easily. And I think many of us want that, don't we? Many of us want a mind that concentrates easily. And so my teacher, way back about 25 years ago, Thanajan Anand, he told me to spend the first 5 minutes cultivating loving kindness for myself. Back when I was a young monk with a lot of suffering, a lot of doubts, a lot of restlessness. And then to do the breathing. If one doesn't just do metta for oneself, that's the foundation. We need to understand that if we want to have loving kindness for all beings, or even for a few other beings, it has to radiate from one's own center. There has to be loving kindness in the heart for one to be able to radiate it outwards. And particularly if one wants it to be a dynamic, energetic metta practice, it needs to be pumping from somewhere. And so this working with, when one has a commitment to daily meditation practice and when one experiences resistance, having this metta is enormously helpful. You hold your hand through the process, and you demonstrate to yourself time and time again, you see, I didn't want to sit. And after 5 to 10 minutes of metta, I feel fine, and now I'm happy to sit. And you just see this again and again and again, but you have to really do it, and you have to really mean it. And I guess another way to inspire oneself to do the practice daily without ever letting up is to understand the long-term benefits of that. So if we can be consistently mindful, the mindfulness is going to get stronger. And then I'm sure many of you have the experience of, I even now I have this experience. If I skip my morning meditation, if I did sleep late and I was too busy and I skipped a meditation, when I go on alms round and I'm coming back, I'm talking to the monks, there's less equipoise, there's less balance, there's a little bit more reactivity. But if I do my meditation before I sleep, and I do my meditation before the alms round, I come back and there is just more balance and more centeredness and less reactivity. I've seen this many times. And so when one sees the benefit, okay, if I invest this amount of time, even if it means sitting with a bit of dullness, a bit of sleepiness, it means that when I start to have more contact with more human beings, for many of you that would be with family or in the workplace, there's going to be less reactivity, there's going to be more ability to reflect on sense impingement and react skillfully. And that's, talking about aiming for ultimate liberation from all suffering, it doesn't just all happen in the end. The way practice progresses is that we should be developing some ability to suffer less in our daily lives. So when ways that we used to cause us a lot of suffering, we can learn how to only have a little bit of suffering about it. And little things which cause us a little bit of suffering, we can learn how to not suffer at all. And Luang Por Chah said, practice is about turning big suffering into little suffering and turning little suffering into no suffering. There's just these nice phrases that Luang Por Chah would say, which kind of condense things. But in order to be able to turn big suffering into little suffering, that means there needs to be some loving kindness, there needs to be presence of mind, there needs to be some clear comprehension and ability to see things clearly and reflect wisely. Keeping the mind in the middle is something that my teacher Ajahn Anand says all the time. Not falling into delighting or aversion. Mai yin di, mai yin lai, hin tai. One chit ben klang, keep the mind in the middle. Don't fall into liking and disliking. So if we get up and we do our practice, that begins to become a possibility. So one can even set the aspiration for the remainder of the day. I'm going to make an effort to be less reactive, to have a more balanced mind state. And so one can see through regular daily practice over a period of time that is the case. Things that used to cause us a lot of suffering will cause us less suffering. Little things that cause us suffering don't cause us suffering. For myself as an abbot and as a teacher, there are many times when people don't behave perhaps as they should. I'm talking about the other monks and sometimes lay people. And a lot of the people who observe me from outside won't even know that I've seen something that I don't think is quite right. I've thought about saying something and I've decided not to say something. And that will be something that the people around me won't be aware of. Something that I've learned is that if you are going to say something, you have to choose your time and you have to choose the way you say it. You have to make sure there's some good energy. And also you have to ask yourself, if I say something, will this person change? And so you have this whole process where somebody looking at you from the outside, you look like you're fairly calm, and you've had this whole process where you've thought about saying something, decided not to say something, and that person doesn't even know. And it's probably, as an abbot, I live with, currently there's 5 bhikkhus here, 4 other ajahns, we're all ajahns. And I would say it's probably some kind of a ratio of 19 out of 20 times that I don't say anything. It's like, and if I let my meditation degenerate, and if I didn't have the ability to see that I wanted to say something, there's a little bit of irritation. Somebody hasn't done something according to a preference or a standard. Now, if I would say something every time, I'd probably be living alone. One simply has to be mindful of the fact that people don't want to be scolded that much. People don't want to be corrected that much. And so one has to have realistic expectations of just how much people want you to train them, how much they'd rather be left to train themselves with an occasional reminder. So, in terms of turning little suffering into no suffering, having enough presence of mind to be able to choose, do I say something? Don't I say something? If I'm going to say something, when do I say it? How do I say it? With what attitude? And then those who live with you have less suffering, and you have less suffering. Probably a lot of silence, sometimes not saying anything. And so yeah, in our daily life, the suffering gets less. But in terms of, if we want to see the power of mindfulness, I like to refer to these couple of occasions from the suttas fairly consistently. It was in one of those weeks after the Buddha's enlightenment in the area of Bodh Gaya. I think there were 7 weeks where Lord Buddha was delighting in the bliss of liberation, and after coming out of that, he would review and have some insights or recognitions. And one of the things he was kind of in awe of the discovery of the liberation, making such statements as, what I have attained to or penetrated into is difficult to perceive, difficult to accomplish, goes against the grain of the world. Most people won't understand it. And then he's then asking, how is it possible? How is it possible that I did? And then he makes these pithy statements. These 4 foundations of mindfulness, when cultivated, when made much of, lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless. That's a really huge statement about the power of mindfulness. And it's something that we don't really recognize, I think, in the beginning stages. When you, I think one begins to notice the power of mindfulness probably in the retreat context. If you're doing a 10-day retreat, you start to do about 10 hours of practice a day. It's like, it seems like it's really hard for the first few days and nothing's happening. But then by day 5 or day 6 or day 7, there's a genuine kind of an insight, a significant sense of letting go of an experience of something quite profound, a deeper reality, a different way of seeing things with no suffering. And it's like, oh, wow. Yeah, these practices of mindfulness, being consistently mindful, they really do have power. And then one glimpses it. And then also in the introduction to the Anapanasati Sutta, Lord Buddha taught in the Savatthi area. He was talking about the benefits of Anapanasati, and he said that that's the breath meditation, Ana in breath, Pana out breath, Sati mindfulness. He said, by practicing Anapanasati diligently, consistently, regularly, the 4 foundations of mindfulness are cultivated. In cultivating these 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 7 factors of enlightenment are brought to fulfillment. In bringing the 7 factors of enlightenment to fulfillment, the mind is liberated. It's literally one paragraph. It starts with breath meditation and it ends with enlightenment. And it's just such a wonderful example of where the Buddha is being very, very clear, his practice. And you can see how, right? It's like you come to sit, you want to be aware of the breath, but there's some pain in the body. So it's like you're trying to be aware of the breath, but there's this body there, and there's pain in it, and you're aware of the body, aware of forms, trying to be aware of the breath. There's thoughts, there's emotions. You can just like knowing the thought, putting it down, knowing the thought, putting it down. Feelings in the heart area, emotions, it's like mind states, knowing, and we begin to know it's pleasant, it's neutral, it's unpleasant, it's wholesome, it's unwholesome, it's neutral. Just in its act of sitting and establishing a bit more clarity and turning inwards, one notices all these other things. You notice the body, notice mind states, notice dhammas in the mind, and notice other dhammas, the nature of characteristics, because that act of bringing mindfulness, bringing the awareness to knowing the feelings of the breath consistently increases that sense of clarity and presence of mind, and clarity of and presence of mind sees things in accordance with their characteristics more clearly. Whereas if we allow the mind to follow its habits, there'll be a self-view and there'll be the habitual opinions and habitual reactions. When we come to be with the breath, we'll see a thought as a thought, a feeling as a feeling, arising, staying for some time, ceasing. Not I, not mine, not self, not other. And so the breath meditation as an object and the breath meditation as a practice, full of incredible potential. But as Lord Buddha says, for mindfulness to lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless, it has to be cultivated, made much of. So I think that's what I have to say essentially about the value of daily practice, the importance of it, significance of it. And also it really becomes, I guess the last thing I'll say is it really becomes a refuge. And in terms of like the Dhamma becoming a refuge, if you become adept and skilled and consistent with a meditation object, then that becomes something that you can rely on. It's like a walking stick, or it's like an eye in the storm, an anchor in the sea. You can come back to the feeling of the breathing when throughout the day, and really depend upon it. And it really becomes this idea of Dhamma as refuge and Dhamma practice as refuge really becomes something very real. So I hope that something I said may have been helpful to you. I wish you all the best in your cultivation.